The rope swayed, a fat, lazy serpent in the morning heat. 10-year-old Lily stood beneath it, small as a sparrow against the rough-hewn gallows. Her eyes, wide and dark, followed the dust devils swirling across the parched earth of Redemption Gulch. She didn't seem to notice the crowd, the grim faces, the preacher mumbling scripture. Just the dust. Silas leaned against the hitching post, a silent monument of weathered leather and sun-baked skin. He'd seen hangings before. Too many. But something about this one felt different. Wrong. Sheriff Grady read the charges, his voice booming, amplified by the emptiness of the high desert. Stealing bread. A crime, sure. But a hanging offense? Silas' jaw tightened. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in the last 5 years. Not since. Well, that didn't matter now. What mattered was the girl. He watched Lily. She flinched when Grady's voice cracked like a whip. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Orphaned, Grady had said. No family. No one to speak for her. Silas knew that feeling. Knew it bone deep. The preacher finished his prayer, a hollow echo in the vastness. Grady signaled to the hangman, a gaunt figure with a face like dried leather. The hangman stepped forward, a black hood clutched in his hand. Silas pushed himself off the hitching post. His spurs jingled softly on the hard-packed dirt, a sound that cut through the silence. Every eye in Redemption Gulch turned to him. He hadn't moved so deliberately, so purposefully, in years. He hadn't felt this, alive, in even longer. He stopped at the foot of the gallows. The hangman hesitated, confused. Grady's face flushed crimson. Silas, he barked. This ain't your concern. Stand aside. Silas didn't speak. He simply looked at Lily. Her eyes met his, a flicker of something hope, igniting in their depths. Then he turned back to Grady, his gaze flat, unwavering. The kind of gaze that had stared down grizzlies and Comanches alike. The kind of gaze that said without a word, this far and no further. Grady's face contorted. Insubordination, Silas. You're obstructing justice. He reached for the revolver holstered at his hip. The crowd murmured, a low, uneasy rumble. They knew Silas. Knew what he was capable of. Knew he didn't bluff. Silas ignored Grady. He focused on the girl. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn silver dollar. He flipped it, the coin glinting in the sun, and held it out to Lily. Heads, you walk. Tails, you, well, we don't need to talk about tails. The hangman lowered the hood. Lily stared at the coin, then at Silas, her brow furrowed in confusion. Grady sputtered, That's not how the law works. Silas' voice, when it came, was a low rasp, like gravel grinding against stone. This ain't about law, Grady Dotto. It's about right. He looked past Grady, directly at Judge Barlow, who sat on a makeshift dais, his face hidden in shadow. Judge, this trial, it smells rotten. Barlow shifted uncomfortably. The girl is guilty, Creek. Plain as day. Silas didn't flinch at the use of his given name, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. Guilty of being hungry. Guilty of being alone. Guilty of being in a town run by vultures. He paused, letting his words sink in. This court, it's convened on stolen land, built with stolen money, and presided over by a man who steals justice from orphans. He spat on the dusty ground. I see no law here, Judge. Only greed. Is one good eye, the other lost to a Cheyenne arrow years ago, fixed on Barlow, piercing the shadows. One good eye is all it takes to see the truth. He turned back to Lily, the silver dollar still extended. Your choice, girl. Heads or tails. Don't let them steal that from you, too. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the creak of the gallows and the distant cry of a hawk. The fate of Lily, and perhaps Redemption Gulch itself, hung in the balance, on the spin of a silver dollar and the unwavering gaze of a silent rancher. Lily's small hand trembled as she reached for the coin. It felt heavy, impossibly so, like the weight of her life rested on its cold surface. She looked at Silas, really looked at him. The lines etched deep in his face told a story of hardship, of loss, of a life lived hard under a merciless sun. But in his one good eye, she saw something else. A spark. A promise. She closed her fingers around the silver dollar. Heads, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmuring crowd. I choose heads. Silas nodded, a barely perceptible movement. He flicked his wrist. The coin spun, a dizzying flash of silver against the blue sky. It landed with a soft thud in the dust at Lily's feet. Silas knelt, his joints creaking in protest. He brushed the dust away, revealing the eagle. Heads. Collective gasps swept through the crowd. Grady's face purpled. That's not binding. She's already been judged. Silas rose slowly, his gaze never leaving Grady's. Is that so, Sheriff? Then I reckon you won't mind a little wager. A test of your justice. He paused, a sardonic glint in his eye. It'll prove this girl's innocence within a week. Find the real thief. Bring him to your doorstep. If I fail, he'd let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Grady hesitated. He looked at Judge Barlow, seeking guidance. Barlow, caught off guard, simply shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes. The judge knew Silas. Knew he wasn't a man to make idle threats. And he knew the whispers about Redemption Gulch, the growing discontent, the feeling that things were off. And if you succeed, creak. Grady asked, his voice tight. If I succeed, Silas said, his voice flat, you release the girl. You apologize. And you admit that maybe, just maybe, this town ain't as righteous as you like to think it is. Grady's jaw clenched. And if you fail, he repeated, pushing the point. Silas looked at Lily, a fleeting expression of something akin to tenderness crossing his face. Then he turned back to Grady, his gaze hard as granite. If I fail, I take her place on the gallows. Fair enough. The silence descended again, heavier this time, laced with disbelief. No one in Redemption Gulch had ever heard of anyone volunteering for the hangman's noose. It was madness. Or maybe, just maybe, it was justice. Grady swallowed hard. He looked at the crowd, gauging their reaction. They were watching him, their faces a mixture of shock, curiosity, and a grudging respect for Silas' audacity. He couldn't back down now. Not without losing face. A week, creak, Grady spat. You got 1 week. And if you ain't back here with the real culprit by then, you'll be swinging right alongside her memory. He gestured to the hangman. Get her down. The hangman, looking relieved, fumbled with the rope. Lily was freed, but she remained frozen, staring at the dusty ground where the silver dollar had landed. She didn't move until Silas gently took her arm. Come on, girl, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. We got a ride to catch. He led her to a swayback mare, tied to a nearby rail. He helped her mount, his movements economical, practiced. He swung himself onto a taller, sturdier horse, a roan gelding that looked as weathered and unforgiving as its rider. Without a word, they rode. Past the saloon with its swinging doors, past the mercantile with its faded awning, past the church with its stark white steeple that seemed to mock the corruption festering beneath. They rode past the last houses, the last fences, and out into the open expanse of Redemption Valley. Lily clung to the mare's mane, her knuckles white. She glanced back at Redemption Gulch, a cluster of false fronts and broken promises shimmering in the heat. It looked smaller now, less menacing, but no less hateful. Silas rode in silence beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves, and the mournful cry of a hawk circling overhead. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Lily spoke. Her voice was small, hesitant. Silas didn't turn. Why what, girl? Why did you do it? Risk yourself for me? He paused, considering. He wasn't used to questions, wasn't used to explaining himself. Saw something in your eyes, he said finally. Something worth saving. He spurred his horse forward, leaving Lily to ponder his cryptic words. They rode on, deeper into Redemption Valley. The landscape changed, becoming more rugged, more desolate. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth, their shadows long and sharp. Twisted Joshua trees clawed at the sky, their branches gnarled and skeletal. The air grew thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust. Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. Redemption Valley, God. A place whispered about in Redemption Gulch. A place of lost minds, forgotten graves and secrets buried deep beneath the unforgiving earth. She looked at Silas. His face was impassive, unreadable. But she noticed something then, something she hadn't seen before. A flicker of determination in his one good eye. He wasn't just riding to save her. He was riding for something else. Something buried deep within Redemption Valley. Something that had called him back after all these years. She didn't know what it was, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that their journey had just begun, and that Redemption Valley, for all its desolation, held the key to their survival. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and urged her mare forward, determined to face whatever lay ahead. From now on, she decided, her name wasn't Lily anymore. It was Hope. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Silas guided them to a narrow canyon, a sliver of shadow cutting through the harsh landscape. A small spring trickled from the rock face, feeding a patch of stubborn green. We camp here, he said, dismounting with a weary sigh. He unsaddled the horses, hobbling them to graze on the sparse vegetation. Hope watched him, her initial fear slowly giving way to a fragile trust. He moved with a quiet efficiency, a man accustomed to hardship and solitude. He built a small fire, the flames licking at the dry wood, casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. The smell of burning sage filled the air, a pungent, comforting aroma. He offered Hope a piece of jerky, which she accepted gratefully. It was tough and salty, but it filled the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, Hope spoke, her voice hesitant. I don't remember much before the orphanage. Silas grunted, his gaze fixed on the flames. He wasn't expecting gratitude or confessions. Just the facts. Bits and pieces, she continued, her brow furrowed in concentration. A big house, lots of flowers, a woman singing. She trailed off, lost in the fragments of a forgotten life. Name? Silas asked, his voice low. Hope shook her head. I don't know. It's like a dream. Everything's blurry. She paused, then her eyes widened. Wait, there was a name. Not my name, but a place. Willow Creek. Silas' hand tightened around his tin cup. Willow Creek. The name was familiar, a ghost from his own past. A wealthy landowner named Bulmont had controlled most of Willow Creek, a man known for his ruthlessness and his vast holdings. Bulmont had disappeared some years back, leaving behind a fortune and a legacy of bitterness. He looked at Hope, really looked at her. The faint resemblance to Bulmont was undeniable. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn set to the jaw. Tell me more, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Hope frowned, struggling to recall more. There was a music box, a silver one. It played a waltz, and there was a map hidden inside. A map. That could be the key. Bulmont was rumored to have hidden his fortune, burying it somewhere on his vast property. A map could lead them to it, and perhaps to the truth about Hope's past. Silas stood up, his joints creaking in protest. He walked to his saddlebags and rummaged inside, pulling out a worn piece of parchment. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a map of Redemption Valley. He spread it out on the ground, weighting down the corners with stones. He pointed to a spot marked with a faded X. Willow Creek is just west of here, he said. According to this map, Bulmont owned a large ranch in that area. Well, start there. Hope leaned closer, her eyes scanning the map. She felt a strange pull, a sense of recognition. It was as if a long-dormant memory was stirring within her, guiding her towards a destiny she couldn't yet comprehend. She looked at Silas, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Do you think I might belong there? Silas didn't answer. He simply folded the map and tucked it back into his saddlebags. He knew that Willow Creek held more than just the answer to Hope's past. It held secrets, buried deep beneath the soil. The first rays of dawn crept over the canyon rim, painting the rock face in shades of rose and gold. Silas was already awake, tending the fire, the coffee pot perched precariously on the embers. Hope stirred, shivering in her thin blanket. He tossed her a piece of jerky and pointed towards the spring. Wash up, he grunted. We ride at first light. Hope obeyed, her movements still stiff from the previous day's journey. The water was icy cold, but it woke her up, washing away the remnants of a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. They packed quickly, Silas securing the saddlebags, Hope tightening the cinch on her mare. As they rode out of the canyon, Silas scanned the surrounding terrain, his one good eye constantly searching for any sign of danger. Redemption Valley was a haven for desperados, men driven to the fringes of society by poverty, greed, and desperation. They rode for several hours, the landscape gradually changing from rugged canyons to rolling hills covered in scrub brush and sage. Silas kept a steady pace, pushing the horses, but not overexerting them. He knew they had a long way to go, and he wanted to conserve their strength. Around midday, as they crested a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of open country, Silas suddenly reined in his horse. He held up a hand, signaling Hope to stop. "Something's not right," he muttered, his gaze fixed on a cluster of rocks further down the ridge. Hope squinted, trying to see what Silas had spotted. At first, she saw nothing. Then she noticed a faint glint of sunlight reflecting off something metallic. "A rifle barrel." "Rattlesnake Ridge," Silas said, his voice low. "Perfect place for an ambush." He dismounted quickly, pulling Hope off her horse. He led them behind a cluster of boulders, providing some cover. "Stay here," he said, his voice hard, "and keep your head down." He drew his rifle, a Winchester model, 1873, and moved cautiously towards the edge of the rocks. He peered over the top, his eyes scanning the terrain below. He saw them then. A half-dozen men, their faces hidden behind bandanas, their rifles trained on the trail below. Outlaws, waiting for them. Silas knew they were outnumbered, outgunned. But he wasn't about to let them take Hope. Not without a fight. He took a deep breath, steadied his rifle, and fired. The shot echoed through the valley, shattering the silence. One of the outlaws crumpled to the ground, clutching his chest. The ambush was sprung. The remaining outlaws opened fire, bullets whizzing past Silas, kicking up dust and rock. He returned fire, calmly, deliberately, picking off his targets one by one. Hope washed in terror, huddled behind the boulders, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen violence like this before, never witnessed such cold, calculated brutality. But she also saw something else. She saw Silas, a man transformed. A man who had been quiet, stoic, almost invisible, now fighting with a fierce determination, protecting her with everything he had. He moved with a deadly grace, his movements fluid and precise. He was a gunslinger, a survivor, a man who knew how to kill. The gunfight raged for what seemed like an eternity. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the screams of the wounded. Finally, after what seemed like an impossible struggle, the remaining outlaws scattered, disappearing into the rocks and scrub brush. Silas stood, panting, his rifle smoking in his hand. He surveyed the scene, making sure the coast was clear. Then he turned to Hope, his face grim. "We got to go," he said, his voice hoarse. "They'll be back. More of them." He reloaded his rifle, his movements quick and efficient. He helped Hope to her feet, his grip firm but gentle. They scrambled back to their horses, mounting quickly and urging them forward. They rode hard, pushing the animals to their limit. Silas led the way, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of pursuit. They rode for miles, until the sun began to dip below the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Finally, as darkness descended, Silas reined in his horse. He pointed to a crumbling adobe structure in the distance. "Abandoned trading post," he said. "Well, hole up there for the night." They approached the trading post cautiously, Silas leading the way, his rifle at the ready. The building was in ruins, its roof partially collapsed, its walls riddled with bullet holes. But it offered shelter, a place to rest and regroup. They dismounted, leading their horses inside the crumbling walls. Silas quickly built a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the adobe walls. Hope tended to the horses, giving them water and a handful of grain. Silas examined his wounds. A bullet had grazed his arm, leaving a bloody gash. He poured some whiskey on a rag and cleaned the wound, his face impassive. Hope watched him, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She had never seen a man so stoic, so resilient. "Let me," she said, approaching him with a piece of clean cloth. Silas hesitated, then nodded. He allowed her to clean and bandage his wound, her touch surprisingly gentle. As she worked, she noticed the scars that crisscrossed his body, a testament to a life lived on the edge. When she finished, she sat down beside him, her gaze fixed on the fire. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling flames and the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, Silas spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Someone I used to know." Hope looked at him, her eyes questioning. "My wife," he continued. "She was strong, like you. She wouldn't back down from a fight." He paused, his gaze clouding with a distant sorrow. "She died a long time ago. Comanches." Hope reached out and gently touched his hand. "I'm sorry," she said. Silas nodded, his gaze returning to the fire. "This valley, it takes things from you. Everything. But it can give you something too, if you're willing to fight for it." He looked at Hope, his one good eye filled with a flicker of hope. "You got a fight in you, girl. I can see it. Don't let it die." He leaned back against the adobe wall, closing his eyes. Hope watched him, her heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she wasn't alone. She had Silas, a hardened gunslinger with a haunted past, but a man who was willing to fight for her, to protect her. And that, she realized, was enough. For now, Hope couldn't sleep. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on her eyes. Silas slept soundly, his breathing deep and even, but Hope remained wide awake, her mind racing. The day's violence, Silas' story, the weight of her unknown past, it all swirled within her. She reached inside her shirt, her fingers tracing the outline of the silver locket she always wore. It was the only thing she had from before the orphanage, a cold, smooth comfort against her skin. On a whim, she opened it. Inside were two tiny portraits, faded with age, a handsome man with kind eyes, and a beautiful woman with a gentle smile. She didn't recognize them, but a pang of longing resonated within her. She snapped the locket shut, then paused. Something felt different, a slight resistance. She pried it open again, examining the interior closely. There, behind the portraits, she found a thin piece of folded parchment, tucked into a hidden compartment. Her heart pounded. Could this be it? A clue to her past. She carefully unfolded the parchment. It was a map, crudely drawn but surprisingly detailed. It depicted a section of Willow Creek, with landmarks she didn't recognize: a split rock, a lone pine, a dry creek bed, and marked with a bold X, a location labeled simply Beaumont's Cache. Hope's breath caught in her throat. Beaumont, the name Silas had mentioned. The ruthless landowner. Could this map lead her to his hidden fortune? And more importantly, to the truth about who she was. She studied the map intently, memorizing the landmarks. It seemed to point to a remote area in the foothills, a place she had never seen. But she felt a pull, an instinctual understanding of the terrain. It was as if the map was unlocking something within her, awakening a dormant memory. She glanced at Silas, still sleeping soundly. Should she wake him? Tell him about the map? But something held her back. A sense of caution. A feeling that this was something she needed to explore on her own. At least, to begin with. She carefully folded the map and tucked it back into the locket, securing it tightly. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine the landscape depicted on the parchment. The split rock, the lone pine, solensemni, eisi, ivoluna sesteln, lainwo, koindo, gallows. The dry creek bed. She would find them. She had to. Sleep finally came, but it was fitful and restless, filled with dreams of hidden treasures and forgotten faces. When she awoke, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Silas was already awake, tending the embers of the fire. He glanced at her, his one good eye narrowed in suspicion. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. Hope forced a smile. "Just a bad dream," she said. But inside, her heart was pounding with a secret she couldn't yet share. The map in the locket. The key to her past. And the beginning of a new, dangerous journey. Silas watched her, unconvinced. Had learned to read faces in this land. Hers held something new, a purpose. A secret. He wouldn't press. "Not yet." "Coffee's ready," he grunted, handing her a tin cup. "We ride soon. Heading south." Hope took the coffee, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. South wasn't the direction of Willow Creek, or the X on her map. But she knew better than to question Silas. "Not yet." She'd play along, earn his trust further. They packed in silence, the unspoken tension hanging heavy in the air. As they rode, Hope surreptitiously checked the position of the sun, mentally charting a course toward the foothills. She would need to be clever, find a way to slip away without raising Silas' suspicion. 2 days later, they arrived at the edge of Beaumont's land. The Baron, as he was known, controlled vast swaths of the valley, his wealth built on cattle, timber, and the sweat of exploited farmers. His sprawling ranch house, a monument to his greed, stood like a fortress against the rugged landscape. Silas stopped at the property line, a weathered fence marking the boundary between freedom and oppression. "This is as far as I go," he said, his voice flat. "Don't want no trouble with Beaumont." Hope felt a surge of frustration. She needed Silas, his strength, his skills, but she also understood his reluctance. Beaumont was a dangerous man, with deep pockets and even deeper connections. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "I just need to ask him some questions. About my past." It wasn't a lie. Exactly. More like an omission. Silas studied her, his gaze piercing. "Be careful, girl. Beaumont ain't a man to be trifled with. He'll lie, cheat, and kill to get what he wants." "I know," Hope said, her voice hardening. "But I need answers." She urged her mare forward, leaving Silas behind. As she approached the ranch house, she could feel the eyes of Beaumont's men watching her, their faces hard and unforgiving. She straightened her shoulders, trying to project an air of confidence she didn't feel. She dismounted in front of the imposing house, tying her horse to a hitching post. A burly man with a shotgun emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. "State your business," he growled, his eyes narrowed. "I need to speak with Mr. Beaumont," Hope said, her voice clear and firm. "It's about family matters." The man hesitated, then nodded. "Wait here." He disappeared inside, leaving Hope standing alone in the dusty yard. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. This was it. The moment of truth. She was about to confront the man who held the key to her past. And maybe, just maybe, the location of Beaumont's cache. The location on her map. ... The man returned, his face grim. "Beaumont will see you. But keep your hands where I can see 'em." Hope followed him inside, her senses on high alert. The house was opulent, filled with expensive furniture and gaudy decorations, a stark contrast to the poverty that plagued the valley. Beaumont was in his study, a large room filled with books and maps, a decanter of whiskey sitting on his desk. He was a large man, with a fleshy face and cold, calculating eyes. "So," Beaumont said, his voice oily, "you're the little stray sniffing around about your origins? I hear you've been asking questions." Hope stood her ground. "I believe you know something about my family, Mr. Beaumont at all." Beaumont chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Family? In this valley, family is a luxury few can afford. Now, who told you to come here? That doesn't matter. What matters is that I know about the locket, about my parents." Hope watched him closely. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "The locket, a trinket, means nothing." He waved his hand dismissively. "Now, I suggest you leave, before you stir up trouble you can't handle." "Trouble? No, Bilaho. Hope's voice rose. "You call selling orphans and stealing land trouble? I have a map, Mr. Beaumont. A map to something you desperately want to keep hidden." Beaumont's eyes narrowed. "A map? Ah. What map?" Hope didn't answer. She knew she'd struck a nerve. Beaumont's face darkened, his composure cracking. "Caesar here," he barked at the guard standing by the door. The guard lunged, but Hope was ready. She sidestepped him, grabbing a heavy bronze letter opener from Beaumont's desk. She held it up, the point aimed at Beaumont's throat. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling but firm. "I just want the truth. Tell me about my parents. Tell me about Beaumont's cache." Suddenly, a shot rang out from outside. The sound of chaos erupted, shouting, gunfire, the thunder of hooves. Beaumont's eyes widened in panic. "What's going on?" he roared. The guard peeked out the window. "Raiders, sir. Comanches." Beaumont's face contorted with rage and fear. He grabbed a pistol from his desk drawer. "Get them! Protect the house." The guard hesitated, torn between protecting Beaumont and facing the attackers. In that moment of indecision, Hope saw her chance. She shoved Beaumont aside, knocking him off balance. She bolted out the door, into the chaos outside. It wasn't Comanches. It was Silas. The yard was a whirlwind of dust and gunfire. Silas, a grim specter on horseback, cut a path through Beaumont's men. He moved with a practiced economy, each shot deliberate, each movement precise. Hope saw him, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. Beaumont, momentarily stunned, regained his composure and charged after her, pistol raised. "You little viper!" he screamed. Silas saw Beaumont bearing down on Hope. With a guttural roar, he spurred his horse forward, intercepting Beaumont with a bone-jarring tackle. They both went down in a heap, a tangle of limbs and dust. Hope didn't hesitate. She scrambled towards them, grabbing Beaumont's discarded pistol. She pointed it at him, her hands shaking. "Stay back." Beaumont snarled, struggling to his feet. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me a great deal," Hope said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You stole my past, mister." Beaumont had light. "You won't steal my future." Silas, bruised and battered, rose to his feet beside her. He didn't say a word, his presence a silent promise of protection. Beaumont glared at them, his face a mask of hatred. "You think you've won? This valley belongs to me. I made it what it is." "You made it a place of fear and oppression," Hope countered. "But that ends now." A tense silence fell over the yard, broken only by the whinnying of horses and the distant cries of Beaumont's scattered men. The standoff hung heavy in the air, Hope, Silas, and Beaumont, locked in a deadly triangle. Beaumont's eyes darted around, searching for an advantage. He spotted one of his men, still armed, trying to sneak around behind Hope. "Behind you!" Beaumont yelled. Hope whirled around, but it was too late. The man raised his rifle, aiming directly at her. Before Hope could react, Silas moved. With lightning speed, he drew his own pistol and fired. The bullet struck Beaumont's man square in the chest, sending him sprawling. Beaumont, enraged, lunged at Silas. But Silas was ready. He sidestepped the attack, disarming Beaumont with a swift kick to the wrist. Beaumont's pistol clattered to the ground. "It's over, Beaumont," Silas said, his voice low and gravelly. "Leave this valley." Beaumont stared at them, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. He knew he was beaten. He knew he couldn't win. With a final, venomous glare, he turned and limped away, disappearing into the chaos of his crumbling empire. Beaumont gone, the remaining ranch hands scattered like quail. The dust settled, revealing a scene of stunned silence. Hope lowered the pistol, her hands still shaking. The adrenaline began to ebb, leaving her weak and trembling. Silas holstered his gun, his gaze sweeping the yard, ensuring the threat was truly gone. He turned to Hope, his eyes unreadable. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough. Hope nodded, unable to speak. The events of the past few minutes replayed in her mind the confrontation with Beaumont, the chaos of the raid, Silas' unwavering support. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." Silas shrugged, dismissing her gratitude. "Just evening the score." He pointed towards the house. "You find what you were looking for?" Hope hesitated. The map, Dada. Beaumont's cache. She had almost forgotten in the heat of the moment. She nodded, a new resolve hardening her gaze. "There's still work to be done," she said, and walked back towards the house. Inside Beaumont's study, she ignored the overturned furniture and scattered papers. She went straight to the large map of the valley that hung on the wall. It was intricately detailed, showing every stream, every hill, every property line. Hope traced the lines with her finger, her eyes searching for a familiar landmark. Finally, she found it, a small, almost imperceptible marking near a cluster of jagged peaks in the western part of the valley. The X on her map corresponded perfectly. Beaumont's cache. It was real. Hope felt a surge of hope, mixed with a sense of grim determination. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. About righting the wrongs that Beaumont had inflicted on the valley. Silas entered the study, his presence filling the room. He watched her, his silence a form of understanding. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Hope turned to him, her eyes shining with purpose. "Beaumont's cache," she said. "He stole land, cheated farmers, sold orphans. He hid it all. I'm going to find it." Silas nodded slowly. And then Hope looked out the window at the valley stretching before them. Then she said, "We rebuild." The following days were a blur of activity. Hope, with Silas by her side, tracked down Beaumont's hidden fortune. It wasn't easy. The cache was well guarded, hidden deep within the mountains. But Hope was relentless, driven by a burning desire to see justice done. They found the cache, not gold or jewels, but deeds to land, promissory notes, and ledgers filled with evidence of Beaumont's crimes. Hope felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. With Beaumont gone and his ill-gotten gains recovered, Hope began the arduous task of rebuilding Redemption Valley. She returned the stolen land to its rightful owners, forgave the debts of struggling farmers, and established an orphanage for the children Beaumont had exploited. It wasn't easy. The valley was scarred, the people wary. But Hope persevered, her unwavering spirit inspiring others to join her cause. Slowly, gradually, Redemption Valley began to heal. Hope stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt schoolhouse, watching the children play. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the valley. Silas stood beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. "It's not perfect," Hope said, her voice soft. "But it's a start." Silas nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The West ain't never perfect," he said, "but it can be better." Hope watched the children, their laughter echoing in the twilight. Redemption Valley was starting to live up to its name, a fragile green shoot pushing through cracked earth. She felt Silas' gaze on her, a steady presence she had come to rely on. "Better," she echoed, the word catching in her throat. She glanced at him. The setting sun painted his weathered face in hues of orange and gold, etching the lines deeper, making him look even more like the land itself. He shifted, a subtle movement that betrayed a restlessness she hadn't noticed before. "Time I was moving on." The words hung in the air, heavy as a coming storm. Hope felt a pang of something. Not sadness, not exactly. More like a hollow echo of what might have been. "Where to?" she asked, knowing the answer before he spoke. "West," he said, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Always west." She nodded, understanding. Silas was a creature of the open range, a solitary figure drawn to the endless horizon. He wasn't meant to be tied down, not even by something as worthy as rebuilding a valley. "Thank you, Silas," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything." He turned to her then, his gaze direct, unwavering. "You didn't need me. You had it in you all along." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out something small, something that glinted in the fading light. The locket, the one her mother had worn. He had found it, tucked away in Beaumont's strongbox. "Thought you should have this," he said, placing it in her hand. His fingers brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent a tremor through her. Hope closed her fingers around the locket, the cool metal a comfort against her skin. It was a tangible link to her past, a reminder of where she came from. But it was also a symbol of her future, a future she was now forging for herself. He touched the brim of his hat, a silent farewell. Then he turned and walked towards his horse, a dark silhouette against the fiery sky. He mounted, the leather creaking softly in the stillness. Hope watched him go, her heart aching with a nameless emotion. He didn't look back. He simply spurred his horse forward, riding towards the setting sun, disappearing into the vast, unforgiving landscape. The West had claimed him again, as it always did, and Hope was left standing in the dust, the locket clutched in her hand, the future of Redemption Valley resting on her shoulders. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the valley into darkness. But in Hope's heart, a small spark of hope remained, a testament to the silent cowboy who had ridden in and changed her life forever, then ridden away, leaving her to build her own. Years turned into a slow, steady march. The schoolhouse bell, once silent, now rang out across Redemption Valley each morning, a cheerful counterpoint to the mournful wind that still occasionally swept down from the mountains. The children, their faces scrubbed and bright, learned to read and write, their laughter a constant reminder of the future Hope was building. The stolen land, returned to its rightful owners, bloomed again. Fields of golden wheat swayed in the breeze, replacing the dust and despair that had once choked the valley. The farmers, their backs straighter, their eyes brighter, worked with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that their labor was their own. Hope, her face etched with the lines of hard work and quiet determination, became a matriarch, a symbol of resilience and compassion. She was no longer just Hope, the orphaned girl seeking revenge. She was Hope, the heart of Redemption Valley. She often found herself standing on the porch of the schoolhouse, watching the children play, just as she had that evening when Silas rode away. The locket, her mother's locket, always rested close to her heart, a tangible reminder of the past and a source of strength for the future. Sometimes, on clear nights, she would gaze at the stars, wondering where Silas was, if he was still riding west, chasing the endless horizon. She never heard from him, never received a letter or a message. But she knew, deep down, that he was out there, somewhere, a silent guardian watching over the valley he had helped to save. One day, a stranger rode into Redemption Valley. He was a young man, barely more than a boy, with eyes as blue as the summer sky and a hesitant smile. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that reminded Hope of someone she couldn't quite place. He rode straight to the schoolhouse, dismounted, and approached Hope, his hat in his hand. "Mom," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I'm looking for Hope. Hope who rebuilt this valley." Hope studied him, her gaze searching his face. "You found her," she said, her voice soft. "What can I do for you, son?" The young man hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and handed it to Hope. It was a map, a simple, hand-drawn map of a mountain range, with a single X marking a hidden location. Beneath the map, a single word was written in a familiar, spidery script: Redemption. Hope's heart skipped a beat. She knew that handwriting. She hadn't seen it in years, but she would never forget it. She looked up at the young man, her eyes filled with questions. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The young man smiled, a smile that mirrored the setting sun. "He told me to give it to you," he said. "Said you know what to do with it." Hope asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who is he?" The young man's smile widened. "He's the one who taught me how to ride, how to shoot, how to live with honor. Is the one who told me about Redemption Valley, about the woman who made it a beacon of hope. He said it was time I found my own place in the world." He paused, his eyes shining with admiration. "He said his name was Silas." Hope stared at the young man, speechless. Silas thought. After all these years, a part of him had returned. Not Silas himself, but a piece of him. A legacy carried in the heart of this boy. The map, she understood, wasn't about hidden treasure. It was about purpose. Silas was sending this young man to Redemption Valley, entrusting him to her care, hoping she could guide him as he had guided her. She took a deep breath, the scent of sagebrush and dust filling her lungs. The West was a harsh mistress, but it also had a way of bringing people together, of forging bonds that transcended time and distance. Silas knew that. He knew that Redemption Valley was more than just a place, it was an idea, a promise of a better future. "Welcome to Redemption Valley," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "What's your name, son?" "Creek," he replied, his blue eyes meeting hers with a quiet confidence. "They call me Creek." Hope smiled. It was a fitting name, a name that evoked the life-giving waters that flowed through the valley. "Well, Creek," she said, "you've come to the right place. We can always use another good hand." And so, Creek joined the community of Redemption Valley. He worked alongside the farmers, helped rebuild fences, and taught the children how to ride and shoot, just as Silas had taught him. He was a natural, a quiet, steady presence that brought a sense of calm to the valley. He never spoke much about Silas, respecting his privacy. But Hope could see the influence in Creek's every action, in his unwavering sense of justice, in his quiet compassion. Silas had passed on his values, his spirit, to this young man, ensuring that his legacy would live on. Years later, when Hope finally passed away, Creek took her place as the heart of Redemption Valley. He continued her work, ensuring that the valley remained a beacon of hope for generations to come. And as the years turned into decades, the story of Hope and Silas became a legend, whispered around campfires on cold winter nights. The story of the orphaned girl who found redemption in a desolate valley, and the silent cowboy who risked everything to help her. The legend of Silas grew, embellished with each telling. Some said he was a former gunslinger seeking redemption. Others claimed he was a Native American warrior, protecting the land from invaders. But the core of the story remained the same, a lone figure, a one-eyed savior, who rode into Redemption Valley and changed the lives of its people forever. They called him the One-Eyed Savior, a symbol of hope in a world filled with darkness. And even though he was long gone, his spirit lived on in the hearts of the people of Redemption Valley, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, one person can make a difference. The wind whispered his name through the canyons, carried on the backs of eagles, a testament to the enduring power of kindness and courage in the wild, untamed West.